I walked past her twice before I stopped pretending I hadn't seen her. The first time, I told myself she was sleeping. People sleep in strange places when the night turns hard, and I had a train to catch and a coat that wasn't warm enough and a cold of my own coming on. And the smallest part of me, the part I am least proud of, was glad of the excuse to keep my eyes on the pavement. The second time, 20 minutes later, when I came back along Renmore Walk because the river crossing had iced over and the buses had stopped, she was in the exact same fold of stone at the base of the gate, and she was shaking. Not the shivering of a person who is merely cold. The deep, jerking shudder of a body that has run out of ways to keep itself warm. And I knew then that she had not moved because she could not. I want to tell you that I crossed to her at once. I didn't. I stood across the lane under the lamp with my breath smoking in front of my face, and I counted the people going by, the way you count something to keep from feeling it. A man with a briefcase walking fast, 2 women laughing into their scarves, a delivery rider with a glowing bag on his back, a couple sharing a phone screen. Every one of them saw her. You could not stand at the west gate of Renmore House on a night that cold and not see the shape of a young woman curled against the gatepost, and every one of them found the same small lie I had found and stepped around it and went on. No one else stopped. I will carry that with me. The thing that finally moved me was not my own decency. It was him. He was standing his post 18 feet from her, and he had not moved either. You have seen the guards. Everyone has seen the guards, in pictures at least, the tall black bearskin, the red wool tunic buttoned to the throat, the white gloves, the rifle held just so against the shoulder, the chin strap cutting a line across a face that has been trained to give nothing away. We treat them as part of the architecture. We pose beside them and pull faces and wave hands in front of their eyes to see if they will blink, and we tell ourselves they are not quite people while they stand there, because it is easier than wondering what it costs a man to be that still for that long. This one stood inside the lamplight in the freezing dark, and the cold had laid a thin silver of frost along the fur of his cap, and his breath came and went in slow, even clouds, and he did not move. He was not allowed to move. That is the whole of the bargain he had made with the uniform. He guards the gate. He does not leave the box of stone he is given to stand in. He does not speak to the public. He does not turn his head. And he was looking at her. Not turning to her, he could not turn, but I have replayed that night 1,000 times since, and I am certain of what I saw. His eyes, which were meant to be fixed on the middle distance, on nothing, had dropped by a few degrees and come to rest on the shaking shape against his gatepost, and they would not let her go. The discipline held his body rigid. It could not hold his eyes. I watched a man fight a war with himself across 18 feet of frozen cobblestone, and the strangest part is that he never so much as twitched, and yet I have never in my life seen anyone struggle so hard. I crossed the lane. I don't know what I meant to do. I am not a brave man, and I am not a useful one. I sell insurance, and I am frightened of confrontation, and the closest I had come all year to helping anybody was holding a door. But she was shaking, and he was watching her shake and could do nothing. And somewhere between the lamp and the gatepost, I understood that I was the part of this he was missing. I was the man who could move. "Miss," I said and crouched. "Miss, can you hear me?" She lifted her face an inch off her knees, and I felt the floor of my stomach drop. She was young, younger than I had thought from across the lane, perhaps 20, and her lips had gone the gray-blue of slate, and her eyes had the glassy, far-off shine of someone whose body has begun to shut the lights off room by room. There was a sheen of sweat on her forehead in air cold enough to crack stone, which even I knew was wrong, was dangerous, the kind of wrong that means a fever is burning through a person who has nothing left to burn. She tried to say something. What came out was a sound, not a word. "All right," I said uselessly. "All right, all right." I took off my coat, my thin, inadequate coat, and put it over her shoulders, and it was like laying a sheet of paper over a fire that has gone to embers. I looked up, because I did not know what else to do, and I looked at him. He was already looking back at me. And I will tell you, the man behind that frozen face was screaming. I don't mean a sound. I mean that everything a person is, everything that makes a face and not a mask, had risen up behind his eyes and was pressed against the inside of his discipline like a hand against glass. He could not come to her. The whole weight of his training, the regiment behind him, the centuries of men who had stood that gate and not moved while the world did what the world does in front of them, all of it stood between him and the 18 feet he wanted to cross. I have thought a great deal since about what that must be. To be the most disciplined man on the street and the most helpless one. To have given your body so completely to a duty that you can no longer use it for the one thing in front of you that matters. He held my eyes, and then slowly, deliberately, so that I could not mistake it for an accident, he looked down at her, and then back at me, and then to a point past my shoulder up the lane toward the smaller iron door set into the wall beside the great gate. A sentry door. Then back to me, then to her. Down, away, back. He was telling me something. He could not say it, and he could not point, and he could not leave his post to do it himself, so he was doing the only thing left to a man bolted into stillness. He was using his eyes to send me where he could not go. "You want me to knock?" I said out loud, feeling like a fool, feeling like the only sane man in the city. "On that door." He blinked, once, slowly, a man who is not allowed to nod, nodding. I looked at her. She had slumped sideways against the gatepost, my coat sliding off one shoulder, and I looked at the iron door 30 feet up the wall, and I looked back at him standing his frozen post with the frost in his fur and a war behind his eyes, and the train I was going to miss, and the cold I was catching, and the small clean life I had been so carefully protecting all fell away from me at once, and I ran. The iron door had no handle on my side, only a brass plate worn pale by 100 years of gloved hands, and a black bell pull beside it that I did not trust to work. I hammered the door with the side of my fist instead. The sound came back flat and small against the great cold wall, swallowed before it could travel, and for a long moment nothing happened at all, and I thought, of course there is no one. Of course the door is just a door, and the man at the gate is just a statue, and I am a fool kneeling in the dark with a stranger's death starting up beside me. I hit the door again, harder, and shouted into the seam of it. "Hello, there's a woman out here, she needs help. She needs a doctor." A slot in the door opened. Not all the way, just a hand's width and a face behind it, lit from inside by a yellow lamp. Older than the guard at the gate, lined, with the flat, unbothered eyes of a man who has heard everything at that door and believed half of it. A duty porter or the night warden of the gate, I never learned the proper word. He looked at me and at the empty lane behind me, and his face did the thing I had watched a dozen faces do already that night. It found the small lie. It began to close. "Public business at the front office in the morning, sir," he said, already reaching for the slot. "We don't. There's a woman dying against your gatepost." I put my hand flat against the door so he could not shut the slot without crushing my fingers, which I would have let him do. 30 feet from your own guard. He sent me. He looked right at this door and sent me. She's burning with fever and she can't speak and her lips have gone gray. And if you close this door, I am going to stand in the middle of that lane and scream until somebody important wakes up. Do you understand me? I am not a man who says things like that. I heard myself say it the way you hear a stranger in another room. The warden's flat eyes flicked past me, down the lane, to the gatepost where the guard stood, and to the heap of coat and shadow at his feet, and something in him changed. Not kindness exactly, but recognition, the look of a man who has just understood that the small lie is not going to hold tonight. "He sent you," the warden repeated. With his eyes, he couldn't leave his post. He couldn't say it, he told me with his eyes. It sounded insane. It sounded like the most reasonable sentence I had ever spoken. Ask him. No, you can't ask him, he can't answer. That's the whole, just look at him. Look at his face and tell me he doesn't know she's there. The warden looked. I will give him this. He looked properly, the way the people on the lane had not, and I watched him see what I had seen, the frost in the fur, the slow breath, the eyes that would not stop dropping to the shape on the stones. And then he was gone from the slot, and I heard a bolt, and the iron door swung inward, and he stepped out into the cold in his shirt sleeves with a heavy ring of keys in his hand, and the manner of a man who has decided, against the entire grain of his training, to make this his problem. "Show me," he said. I showed him. We crossed back to the gate together and crouched over her, the warden and I, and now that there were two of us, the helplessness doubled instead of halving, because between an insurance salesman and a night porter there was not one useful skill, not one thing either of us knew to do for a young woman with a fever burning her down to nothing on a night cold enough to finish the job. The warden put 2 fingers to her throat and held them there, and his mouth went tight. "Her pulse is all over the place," he said quietly. "She's too hot and too cold at once. This isn't just the night. She's sick. She's properly sick." He looked up the lane, the way men look when they are calculating how far help is and how fast it can come. Ambulance is 20 minutes on a good night and the bridge is iced. 20 minutes. 20 minutes. I looked at her gray lips and I did not think she had 20 minutes. And then the gate moved. I felt it before I understood it, a change in the air, the smallest sound of a heel turning on stone, a sound I had been told all my life that these men do not make. I turned and the guard had broken his stance. He had not run. He had not shouted. There was nothing wild in it. He had simply, with the terrible deliberate calm of a man stepping off a ledge he can never step back onto, lifted his rifle to the carry, turned 90 degrees on the spot, and taken 3 measured marching paces away from his post, 3 paces toward the smaller gatehouse door where he halted, and brought the butt of the rifle down against the stone threshold 3 times. Hard. Crack, crack, crack. The sound of it went up the wall and into the dark like a hammer on an anvil, nothing like my soft, useless fist on the iron door, a sound built to be heard, a sound with a meaning attached to it that I did not know and the warden plainly did, because the warden went very still and said under his breath, "He's calling the guard out." "What does that mean?" I said. "It means," the warden said slowly, getting to his feet, "that he has decided this is worth his career, and he wants everyone behind that wall to know it in the next 10 seconds. I understood later what he had done. A guard does not simply abandon his post. The post is a sacred thing, the still center of the whole ceremony, and to step off it is one of the gravest things a man in that uniform can do. But there is a difference between abandoning a post and raising the alarm at it, and the guard had found the narrow line between them with the precision of a man who knew exactly how much he was spending and had decided to spend it. He had not deserted her, and he had not deserted his duty. He had used the only voice the regulations left him, the butt of his rifle on the stone, 3 hard strokes, an old signal that means turn out, trouble at the gate, and he had spent his discipline, every careful year of it, to make the wall come to her. The wall came. A door I had not even seen, set deeper into the gatehouse, painted the same dark green as the railings, banged open, and light spilled out across the cobbles, and 2 more guardsmen came through it at a controlled run, rifles slung, and behind them a broader man without a bearskin, in the plain dark uniform of someone who gives orders rather than stands a gate. A sergeant. He took the whole scene in one sweep of his eyes, the woman, the coat, the kneeling porter, me, and his own guardsman standing rigid 3 paces off his post with his jaw set like a man waiting to be struck, and he did not waste a breath on questions. "Talk to me," the sergeant said. "Young woman collapsed," the warden said. "High fever, irregular pulse, hypothermic on top of it. She's been out here long enough to freeze, and she's burning up underneath. Ambulance is 20 minutes and the bridge is closed." The sergeant looked at the guard who had broken his stance. For one long second the 2 men held each other's eyes, and I braced for the reprimand, the cold word, the machine of the institution coming down on a man who had stepped out of line. It did not come. The sergeant looked at his guardsman, and his guardsman looked back, still rigid, still saying nothing, and something passed between them that I can only describe as a question asked and answered without a single word. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." And the sergeant gave the smallest nod, and turned away from his own man entirely, because the man had told him everything he needed to know, and there was a life on the stones, and 20 minutes was too long. "We're not waiting 20 minutes, the sergeant said. "Get her inside. Guardroom, the stove's lit. Blankets off every bunk. And get the medic, the duty medical officer, not the front office, the MO, wake him. I don't care what he's doing." One of the young guardsmen was already gone, sprinting back through the green door. "You," the sergeant said to me, "and you," to the warden, "you take her shoulders, I'll take her legs, and we move slow, and we move flat slow, do you hear me? You warm a person like this up too fast and you stop their heart. Slow." I had not known that. I have thought since about how close I came, in my ignorance, to doing the wrong kind of help. We lifted her between us flat, the way he said, and she was so light it frightened me, and we carried her in through the green door out of the killing cold, and the last thing I saw before the door closed behind us was the guardsman who had called us all out, standing alone now in the empty lamplight at the foot of the gate, his rifle once more against his shoulder, his eyes once more forward on the middle distance, having spent everything he had and gone back, instantly, to being a statue. He did not watch us carry her in. He had already given that up. He had a post, and the alarm was answered, and a man like that does not get to follow the people he saves. Inside was a low, warm room I would never have guessed was there. A black iron stove ticking with heat, narrow bunks, a long scarred table, the smell of strong tea and boot polish and wool. They laid her on the bunk nearest the stove, not too near, and the sergeant peeled my thin coat off her and replaced it with 3 heavy gray blankets, one at a time, tucking each one with the unhurried competence of a man who has done this in worse places than a warm room. "Layers," he said, to no one, to himself. "Layers and time and a doctor." He took her wrist again, watching the second hand of the clock on the wall, counting, his lips moving, and his face was the face of a man reading a verdict he did not like. "Sergeant," I said. "Will she?" "I don't know," he said, and I respected him enormously for not lying to me. "She's a long way down, but she's out of the cold and her body stopped fighting the wind, and that's 2 things she didn't have 10 minutes ago. The rest is the doctor." He glanced at the door. "And the doctor," he said, "is taking his time." He was not taking his time, as it turned out. He arrived at a dead run 2 minutes later with his coat over pajamas and a bag in his hand, a tired-looking man of 50 or so who became, the instant he crossed the threshold and saw her, a completely different and completely awake person. He was on his knees beside the bunk before the door had shut. He pressed fingers and a small cold disk to her, lifted an eyelid, asked the sergeant 3 short questions and got 3 short answers, and then he looked up at all of us with an expression I will not forget, because it was the expression of a man delivering bad news fast so that it can be acted on. "This is not exposure," he said, "or it's not only exposure, she's septic. There's an infection running away with her, has been for a day, maybe 2, and the cold has been masking how far it's gone. She needs a hospital and fluids and antibiotics in the next half hour or we are going to lose her, and I do not have those things in this bag." He was already on his feet. "Where is the ambulance?" 20 minutes, the sergeant said. "Bridge is iced." "They're routing the long way." For the first time the doctor looked truly afraid, and the fear in a calm professional's face is a worse thing to see than panic in anyone else's. "She doesn't have 20 minutes, he said. And the sergeant, I watched him do it, turned and looked at the door, and beyond the door, at the dark wall and the gate and the man standing his post in the freezing lane, and I saw him arrive at the same place the guardsman had arrived at 20 minutes before. The place where a rule meets a life, and the rule loses. "Then we don't use the ambulance," the sergeant said. We have cars behind this wall that don't wait for bridges to be open. He reached for the field telephone bolted beside the door. And I am about to make a call that is going to wake up a great many people who outrank me. He made it. I could only hear his half-short, flat, every word weighed. Sergeant of the Gate Guard, West Gate. I have a medical emergency on the threshold, civilian, life-threatening. The duty MO confirms it. Ambulance is 20 minutes out. The river crossing is closed, and the MO says she does not have 20 minutes. I am requesting a duty vehicle and an escort to the infirmary now on my authority, and I will answer for it in the morning. A pause. Whatever came back down the line, he took it without flinching. Yes, sir, on my authority. Now, he set the phone down and looked at the clock again, and I understood that he had just put his career on the same table the guardsman had put his on, and that this was apparently a thing they did, these men, when it came to it. They laid down the careful structure of their whole lives like a man laying down a coat over a puddle, so that someone could cross. Then the wall moved a second time, and this time it moved like an engine. I had thought of everything behind that gate as old and slow and ceremonial, bearskins and brass, and 100 years of standing still. What came next was none of those things. The phone call went out, and somewhere in the dark a different machine woke up, and within 90 seconds there were headlights swinging across the inner courtyard, a low dark car with its engine already running, and 2 more men in plain clothes who moved like they had trained their whole lives for the 90 seconds after an alarm, and they had. They came in fast and quiet. They did not ask what had happened or who I was or why a stranger in shirt sleeves was standing in their guardroom. They asked the doctor one question: can she be moved? And when he said yes, carefully, flat and slow, they had her off the bunk and onto a board and out the door in under a minute, blankets and all, the doctor's hand never leaving her wrist. I followed because no one told me not to, and because I could not have stayed. The courtyard was a blaze of motion in the cold. The low car waited with its doors open and its exhaust pluming white. They slid her into the back, flat across the seat, and the doctor folded himself in after her with his bag, and the sergeant leaned in to the driver and said something short, and I caught the end of it. And they're holding the crossing for you, the barriers are going up. You do not stop for anything between here and the infirmary. You hear me? Nothing. The driver nodded once. And I realized that the sergeant's single phone call had not just summoned a car. It had reached out through the dark and taken hold of the iced bridge that an ambulance could not use, and made men go and stand in the cold and lift the barriers and hold the lane clear, so that one nameless young woman with no coat and no home, and no one in the world who had stopped for her could be carried across it in 90 seconds instead of 20 minutes. The whole apparatus of a great house, the convoy machinery built to move kings, had turned in the night and bent itself entirely toward a stranger dying on its doorstep. Because one man at the gate had decided she mattered and would not look away. The car was gone before I had finished the thought, out through the inner arch with a second vehicle falling in behind it, red lights climbing the wall and vanishing, the engine note dropping away into the frozen streets toward the bridge. And then the courtyard was suddenly, enormously quiet, and there was just me and the sergeant and the warden standing in the white breath of our own breathing, and the cold came back, and I started, to my own surprise and shame, to shake. Not from the cold, from everything else. The sergeant put a hand on my shoulder. It was the first kind thing anyone had done to me all night, and it nearly finished me. You did right, he said. You stopped. A lot of people walked past her tonight. You're the one who didn't. He looked at me a moment longer, taking my measure the way men like him do. What made you stop, in the end? I didn't, I said. The truth of it was only arriving now. I almost didn't. I walked past her twice. I had every excuse and I used all of them. I made myself say the rest. Your man stopped me, the guard. He couldn't move and he couldn't speak and he couldn't leave his post, and he looked at her and then he looked at me. And I just understood that he was asking me to do the thing he wasn't allowed to do. He used me. He used me to cross the 18 feet he couldn't cross himself. I shook my head. I didn't save her, he did, from his post, without moving. He just needed a pair of legs, and I happened to have the only ones on the street that stopped. The sergeant was quiet for a moment. Then he said he'll have noted everything, the exact minute he broke his stance. He'll write it up himself before he sleeps, what he did, why he did it, and that he'd do it again. They always do, the good ones. He glanced toward the gate where the guardsman was still standing, immaculate, motionless, as though none of it had happened, as though the lane had always been empty. There'll be an inquiry. There has to be. He left his post. And what happens to him? The fear in my voice surprised me. I had known the man for the space of one glance across a frozen lane, and I found I cared what became of him as though he were my brother. That depends, the sergeant said, on whether the people above me believe what I believe. He looked at me steadily. Which is that a man who can stand that gate for 2 hours in this cold without moving a muscle, and then break it perfectly, not in a panic, not for show, but in measured paces, with a signal a century old, spending exactly what he had to spend and not 1 ounce more, is not a man who failed his discipline tonight. He's a man who showed us what it was for. He let go of my shoulder. Discipline that can't bend for a dying woman isn't honor, it's just stiffness. The regiment knows the difference. Most of us do, anyway. He walked me back out through the green door, into the lane, into the lamplight, and there was the guardsman, 18 feet from the bare patch of stone where she had lain, my thin coat still crumpled at the foot of the gate-post where they had peeled it off her. The frost had thickened on the fur of his cap. His breath still came in slow, even clouds. His eyes were forward on nothing, on the middle distance, on the cold, exactly as they had been when I first crossed the lane. And you would never, ever have known, to look at him, that 20 minutes ago this man had set fire to his own career to save the life of a woman he had never met and would never meet again. I picked up my coat. I did not put it on. I stood in front of him for a moment, close, the way I had been told all my life you must not stand in front of these men, and I did not pull a face or wave a hand or test his stillness. I just looked at him and I said, quietly, the only thing I had, "Thank you. I'll find out how she does. I'll come back and tell you." He did not move. Of course he did not move, but his eyes came down again, just those few degrees, just for a second, and found mine and held them, and there was the man again, the whole of him, rising up behind the mask the way he had when she was shaking on the stones, except that now it was not a war I saw there. It was something quieter. Relief, I think. The simple, enormous relief of a man who had spent everything and had it be enough. Then his eyes went back to the middle distance, and the soldier closed over the man, and the gate was a gate again, and I went home. I did not sleep. I called the infirmary the next morning, and they would tell me nothing. I was no relation. I had no name to give them. I was a stranger who had carried a stranger, and I spent 3 days in a kind of suspended dread, going to work and selling insurance to people who had no idea that the man across the desk had spent a night learning what he was made of and not entirely liking the answer. On the 4th day, I went back to the gate. A different guardsman stood it now. They rotate, of course. I had not thought of that, and for one terrible moment I thought I would never find the man I owed. But the warden's slot was the same slot, and the warden remembered me, and when I asked, he came out into the lane in his shirt-sleeves again and told me what he knew. She had lived. She had been a long way down. The doctor had not been exaggerating. The sergeant had not been lying to comfort me. For the first night it had gone either way, and the people at the infirmary had not been sure which way it would fall. But the car had crossed the Held Bridge in 11 minutes, and the fluids and the antibiotics had reached her inside the doctor's half-hour, and the infection that had been quietly killing her had met, at last, something stronger than itself. By the 2nd day she was awake. By the 4th, the day I came back, she was sitting up and asking, the warden said, the same question over and over: who carried me in? And what did they tell her? I asked. The truth, the warden said, that a guardsman at the gate called the alarm without leaving his post, and that a passerby stopped when no one else did, and that between the 2 of you she's alive. He almost smiled. She wanted to thank the guard. We had to explain to her that he wasn't allowed to be thanked exactly, that he wasn't even supposed to have a name to her. I'm not sure she understood. People don't, who haven't stood out here. They think the not moving is the strange part. He looked down the lane. The strange part is the moving, what it costs, what he gave. I asked about the inquiry. The warden's face went careful the way it had at the slot that first night. There was one, he said. There had to be. A guard left his post, broke his stance, called the turnout, the whole of it went up the chain. He paused. The sergeant put his name to a statement, said the man's conduct was the finest thing he'd seen at that gate in 19 years. Said that a soldier who could hold his discipline for 2 hours in a killing frost and then break it by exactly the measure required to save a life and not 1 inch more, was not a man who'd failed the regiment. He was the reason the regiment exists. He glanced at me. Word is it went all the way up. Higher than the sergeant, higher than anyone the sergeant ever expected to read it. And the word that came back down, he stopped, and I waited, and the cold sat in the lane between us. The word that came back down, the warden said, was that the gate guard had, and I'm told these were close to the exact words, conducted himself in the highest tradition of the service, and that the standing orders would be reviewed so that no man should ever again have to choose between his post and a life on the threshold of it. They wrote it into the orders, you understand, because of him. So the next man won't have to spend his career to do what he did. The next man will just be allowed. I have thought about that more than almost anything else from that night. That the institution, faced with one man who had broken its rule, did not break the man. It changed the rule. It looked at what he had done and decided that the rule had been wrong and the man had been right, and it bent 100 years of stone around his single act of mercy, so that mercy would be easier for everyone who came after. I did not know that institutions could do that. I had spent my whole life assuming they could only do the other thing. I asked the warden if I could see the guardsman to thank him properly, to tell him she'd lived. The warden shook his head, not unkindly. He's not on the gate today, and even if he were, he shrugged. You can't really, that's not how it works, but I'll tell you this. He leaned in. He asked the morning after, came off his shift and asked the sergeant, very quiet, whether the woman from the gate had made it. First thing he asked. Not about the inquiry, not about himself, about her. And when they told him she'd live, the warden straightened up. They say he just nodded once the way he does and went to get some sleep. Like a man who'd finished a job, that's all he wanted, to know she lived. He never needed to be thanked. I don't think it would even occur to him that there was anything to thank him for. I left my coat with the warden in the end. I don't know why. It seemed wrong to take it home. It had lain over her on the worst night of her life, and it belonged to that night now, not to me. The warden said he'd see it got to her with a note if I wanted to write one. I wrote one. I will not tell you what it said. It was between her and me and the man at the gate and the night. But I will tell you that I signed it the man who almost didn't stop, because that is the truest name I have ever owned, and because I wanted her to know that the person who finally crossed the lane was not a good man, not naturally, was a tired, frightened, ordinary man who had walked past her twice, and that what made him turn around was not his own heart, but the silent, immovable insistence of someone who could not turn around himself. That is the thing I carry now. Not the cold, though I remember the cold. Not even the fear of the night the doctor knelt and said the word septic. What I carry is the picture of a man bolted into stillness by his own discipline, 18 feet from a dying stranger who could not take a single step toward her, and who found inside that stillness a way to move the whole world to her instead. The bridge, the car, the doctor out of his bed, the held barriers, the changed orders. All of it set in motion by a man who never left his post, who spent the one thing he was allowed to spend, his eyes, his signal, his career, and asked for nothing back but the knowledge that she lived. People still walk past those gates and wonder why the guards don't move. I used to wonder it too. I don't anymore. I know now what that stillness is. It is not emptiness, and it is not coldness, and it is certainly not the absence of a man. It is a man holding himself ready, so still, so disciplined, so completely the master of every muscle he owns, for the one moment when stillness is the wrong answer, and he will know it, and he will spend everything he is to be right. No one else stopped that night, but he never moved, and somehow he was the one who carried her in.